Exodus this morning for a very good reason. That's where I wanted it. Psalm 78, along with some of the other Psalms, was specifically designed and written to be used at times of high celebration, important celebrations in the Hebrew community. The Israelites, when they gathered to celebrate, for instance, the Passover, they used this psalm. And the reasons that they used the psalm as they did was to keep the past experiences with God alive and before the people. Alive before the people, but also to teach the children that their roots, their past, are buried deep in these experiences because their ancestors were part of this important journey. And not to forget that when there was need for drink, God taught Moses how to use the staff that he used to part the waters, that same staff to touch the rocks around him, and the rocks would open and pour out water. That when they were hungry, they didn't need to complain to Moses. There were quail for evening meals, and there was bread for morning meals, all coming from God. This is your history, is what the psalm is saying. Do not forget it. And with that in mind, we go back and we look at the story that comes from Exodus and the journey that they were taking. And the one thing that caught my eye in this one was that it says that it sounds to me as I read this, that the Israelites didn't come in one big bunch. They were broken up into groups and followed in groups from one point to the next. And that kind of makes things a little clearer for me, because I often thought, gee whiz, if they were out there 40 years, families were changing, people were passing, babies were being born. Those who had not been in Egypt were coming through, probably joining this great caravan of people. And it would be a massive group of people traveling through this wilderness. The wilderness probably can be interpreted in our time as life. It seemed like a tremendous wilderness at times before we arrive at the reward that we have been searching for and feel that we have been promised. So here they are out there in the wilderness, and I would guess Moses was with the first troop. And as they came to a place, they didn't have a lot to drink. They were concerned, and they start, what do people do when they get frustrated? First they start to murmur. Then they complain to one another. And then as a group, they complain loudly to whoever they think is in authority. They complain to the one that has been chosen to lead them. You know, if you study group process and how that plays out, you'll find out that there's always somebody that is appointed to lead a group. But out of that group will rise up the one who is really going to lead. And I would guess that in this group, Moses was the appointed one to lead them, but out of that group there were certain people who had come up and was given authority by the nature of the group, and it was through that person that they complained to Moses. Did you bring us out here to die? When the we had our homes. Oftentimes when there's a great disaster in this country and across this world, you find the people that are doing Monday morning quarterbacking saying, well, why do they want to live there anyway? This is years ago, back in the 70s, a fellow came into my shop. I had a store at that time, and I said, he had a very distinct accent. We don't have one here in Maine, but the folks coming in, you find that they have a very distinct accent. And I said, where are you from? And he said, and this was back in the 70s, Louisiana. And I said, what brings you to Maine? And he said, we've been flooded out 4 times. And this time we decided to move. He said it was tough leaving the home behind. Even though, but if we had stayed, we knew that we would be facing this again. Has anybody here had to deal with flood? If you have, you know that the water is one thing. The departure of the water is something entirely different. And when we would go into a place where there was a flood, in damage assessment, you first look for the water line. And that would tell you whether you marked the building as destroyed or whether it was marked damaged. You'd wish if it was marked damaged, it had been marked destroyed. And what that meant was that you had to go in and rip out all the sheetrock, take bleach and bleach all the studs, rip up all the floors. The work is endless. The mud stays forever. Some of the churches that I saw, mud lines up would be like on the halfway up these windows. Some of them are right along the eaves. And the people came back to those places on the days after the flood or the hurricane or the disaster, whatever the disaster was. Why? Because it was their place. It was the place that was familiar to them. It was their history. It was their roots. It was who they are. And people came. These folks remembered the good times that they had in Egypt. Probably the times under Joseph. The times that they were in charge, that they were a people who had space and were respected. But then they lost it. And then it got so bad they traveled. Sooner or later, you travel. And you go somewhere else. But you never leave behind the homeland or the thoughts thereof. And you always, hopefully, bring that message to the children, that this is part of their heritage too. I was watching when we did the 9/11 celebration. They had a group of kids there singing. And I thought, they're young enough to not have been born yet. So this is part of their history, their heritage, and it needs to be put before them. But the problem also is that sometimes we have to move on. Like the fellow said, I finally made up my mind that if I was going to do anything with my life, I had to move on. I couldn't spend my life rebuilding my home and waiting for the next flood and being anxious about the